Come along with me as we watch this guy live a miserable life, cursing the toxic friend who scammed him years ago.
Even though he refused at first, his friend pushed so hard that he ended up signing that contract anyway.
Back then, he completely missed the mocking smirk plastered across that traitor's face. Now drowning in debt, he could barely survive in a life that was completely ruined. His only escape was his favorite novel, Dark Hedda. He read it hundreds of times, but it always had a strange, fresh charm, as if the story came alive with every read. By this point, he already knew every single page of the book by heart. Suddenly, he noticed something extremely strange. 2 feathers glowing with purple energy floated near his window. Before he could understand what was happening, his nose suddenly started bleeding. A sharp pain ripped through his chest. He could barely process the agony before everything suddenly faded to black. Instantly, he woke up in a completely different place. His very first thought was that this had to be a dream. However, this bedroom was way too luxurious to belong to his own miserable reality. Looking out the window, he saw dozens of crows in a nearby tree. One of them actually started calling directly at him. Believing he was just dreaming, he tried to calm down, but suddenly the crow became friendly, leaving him completely confused. He stepped closer to the window and froze. 3 suns blazed in the sky, and below lay a strangely familiar city. Watch closely here, because when he saw his reflection, the shocking truth hit him like a lightning bolt. He had transformed into the 7th prince of the Aberan Empire. Just then, a maid named Anna called out from outside. Panicking, he tried to stop her from entering, but he lost his balance and crashed hard onto the floor. Fortunately, Anna seemed to read the room immediately and told him she would return at another time. Hearing her voice and looking around, his biggest suspicion was confirmed. He was inside the world of the novel, Dark Hedda. But there was a massive problem. Out of all the characters, he had possessed the body of Prince Ranabiran. Unlike the other royalty, Ran was doomed to suffer a brutal, tragic death right at the start of the story. Alone in his room, he cursed his terrible luck. But check this out. Suddenly, someone appeared and introduced himself as Sane. The prince's expression turned ice cold the very second he heard that name. He knew exactly who this guy was, and he knew his dark, hidden motives. Noticing he had not eaten, Sane fake worriedly asked how he felt. The young man, no longer the real prince, took a deep breath to steady himself. He had to stay composed. Looking Sine straight in the eyes, he told him he was already feeling better. Sine ordered the food to be brought in. Anna quickly obeyed and began serving the young prince his meal. Her hands trembled with absolute terror during the entire process. Ranabiran looked at the food, unable to believe they served such trash to royalty. Moving around, he accidentally touched the hot kettle and burned his hand. But the reaction that followed left him completely frozen in shock. Anna's face went completely pale, as if her world was ending. She dropped to her knees, desperately begging for forgiveness, despite doing nothing wrong. Seeing her panic, Ran suddenly remembered a crucial detail about the original owner of this body. The real Ren possessed a violent temper, cruelly punishing his servants for even the smallest mistakes. No wonder any tiny mistake unleashed absolute panic throughout the entire palace. Meanwhile, Sane pretended to be relieved to see that the prince was feeling better. However, the secretary quickly revealed his true intentions by spreading out several documents on the table. Seeing those papers instantly raised red flags. Having read the novel, he knew these contracts were a scam to steal his vast imperial fortune. The original Ran would have signed without a second thought, falling straight into their trap. Sine was amused by his sudden hesitation and mocked him for not signing it quickly. That humiliating mockery instantly triggered the worst memories from his past life. He remembered the very contract that ruined everything and the blind trust he placed in someone who never deserved it. The parallel between both situations was undeniable, sparking a fierce new determination within him. Instead of signing, he calmly pointed out the financial errors and questioned the massive waste of paperwork. Sen was absolutely shocked that the useless prince actually noticed something so suspicious. And trust me, you and I both know this game is only just getting started. Alright, you and I are about to watch a man determined to never be anyone's puppet again. With tension at its peak, Rand deliberately drops a valuable pocket watch. It shatters on impact, leaving broken glass scattered all over the carpet.
He coldly claims it just slipped from his hands, even though it was completely on purpose. Knowing Sin has far less power than he brags about, Rand decides it is time to teach this arrogant secretary a lesson.
The pure hatred on Sin's face shows that his provocation is working absolutely beautifully.
Leaving him no room to defend himself, Rand blames him for the distraction that caused the accident. He points at the mess on the floor and orders Sin to clean it up personally. The order freezes the secretary. In this empire, royalty stands above everyone, holding authority that borders on the divine. Even if they saw Rand as the black sheep of the royal family, his status remained infinitely higher than a mere secretary. Sin struggles to hide his massive resentment. Deep down, he despised the prince as a useless disgrace, and the heir's black hair only fueled his prejudices. But the heavy weight of imperial blood leaves him with absolutely no choice but to obey. Swallowing his pride, he kneels and starts picking up the pieces, struggling to hold back his fury. When he finishes, Sin announces it is clean, but before he can leave, Rand kicks a nearby cup, making a fresh mess. The secretary is speechless, but watch closely here. The prince says a little extra practice will improve his cleaning skills. This kind of intense humiliation is pushing Sin right to his limit. Though he lacks the power to openly rebel, sick of being humiliated, he threatens to report the prince to the empress. But unfortunately for him, Rand knows that threat is completely useless. The secretary does not even have direct contact with the royals. He just piggybacks on power that is not his. So Rand orders Achon to cover her ears. Terrified, she immediately obeys without a single moment of hesitation. Confident that she cannot hear anything, Rand begins revealing dark secrets he was never supposed to know. He exposes the embezzlement, conspiracies, and crimes Satan had carefully hidden away for years. With every single accusation, the secretary turns so pale he looks like he is staring straight at death. Soon, rumors spread among the servants. Anna and the other maids whisper about the prince's strange change, trying to understand what happened. Somehow he seems way more terrifying now than ever before. But look on the bright side with me. At least he barely leaves his palace now, giving them a little relief. Meanwhile, Rand spends all of his time hidden inside the palace library. Staring at the cloudy sky outside his window, he reflects on how well he has adapted to this new role. The servants avoid him at all costs, and Sin has completely vanished since that tense confrontation. Since the original story will not start for another year, he decides to relax for the first time since arriving. Memories of his past life resurface, recalling when he first found Darkheader in a library and was captivated by it. And now that he lives inside this very world, he plans to enjoy this calm before the real protagonist finally appears. Staring up at the endless sky beyond the palace, he imagines how incredible it would be to fly free on his own wings. Suddenly, an unbearable pain explodes throughout his body. The cup slips from his hands and shatters on the floor as pure agony consumes him. Unlike the pain he felt when dying in his previous lives, this is completely different. It feels as if his entire body has been thrown straight into a blazing furnace. Shortly after, as Yon enters the room to do her usual cleaning chores. Since the room looks empty at first glance, she is glad the troublesome prince is nowhere to be found. Right away, her gaze shifts down to the broken cup on the floor. It hurts to see such an expensive object destroyed, thinking of how much that money would have helped her poor family. Before she can lament further, a strange noise behind the book startles her. A red-eyed crow flies out from the shadows. The bird circles the room as Anna watches it, feeling deeply confused. Not understanding how it got into the Imperial Library, she finally manages to catch it. Holding the crow, she warns it that a terrifying person lives here. Trust me, you and I just saw Rand discover a truly shocking truth. Get ready, because our main character is no longer human. He is now the crow Anna holds in her hands. Giving him no time to react, she took him straight to the window and threw him out without hesitating. Pure panic consumed him entirely as he watched the ground rushing up toward him at high speed. As the wind roared around him, Rand desperately tried to survive, and right before crashing, a deep instinct woke up inside him. He focused completely on his wings, forcing them to move, and to his surprise, his new body actually obeyed him. That desperate flapping slowed his fall bit by bit until he managed to stabilize and float in midair. Instead of certain death, he was now gliding majestically over the vast gardens of the royal palace. After spending some time testing his flight, he returned to discover this bizarre transformation could be fully reversed. Ran quickly learned that he could shapeshift whenever he wanted just by focusing his mind. But this amazing ability came with a serious issue, since this power was never mentioned in the novel's original story. Since it did not exist in Dark Hedda, revealing it could drastically alter the future before he found his true origin. And believe me, keeping it secret was his only option. His thoughts were cut short when Anna warned him the monthly royal ritual was starting, instantly catching his attention. Though it seemed like a simple ceremony, those who knew the Empire's secrets understood its dark, true purpose perfectly. It was a hidden succession test where the imperial family showed off their great talents and combat skills before the emperor. Having only read about this on paper, Ran felt a deep curiosity to witness the ritual with his own eyes. Shortly after, he entered the Great Hall to finally gather alongside the other members of the imperial family. The massive difference between him and his relatives could not be more obvious at first glance. His siblings showed off dazzling blonde hair with imposing auras, while his dark hair made him stand out like a hated shadow. Soon, one prince in particular shot him a look filled with pure hostility. That enemy was Salos Aeron, the 8th prince and Ron's half-brother, who immediately began insulting him with unbearable direct contempt. Instead of answering, Ron simply ignored him, and that complete indifference angered Salos even more. Luckily, the first princess arrived just in time to stop that ridiculous provocation. Forcing the young prince to shut up as everyone took their seats, Ran carefully analysed the grand table layout. Look at this. Every seat reflected their power and influence. In this empire, power depended on Manus, and those born with light hair usually possessed more energy, giving them incredible advantages. Since Ran lacked Manus and his hair was black, he occupied the absolute lowest spot of all. But the hall's tension shifted completely when the imposing emperor finally appeared. Every noble stood up immediately to show deep respect to the supreme leader of the entire nation. The emperor calmly sat down and ordered the ritual to begin, showing very little interest on his face. In front of him sat Prasa, a mystical ancient relic that once belonged to the empire's actual founder. This ancient stone slab measured a person's amount of Manus to reveal their current level of power. When the sovereign placed his hand on the relic, an incredibly bright blue flash erupted throughout the room. That immense energy traveled all the way down the table, demonstrating a force unreachable for anyone else in the room. After showing off his sheer might, the sovereign challenged his children to test their skills against his own. There was no arrogance in his offer. Everyone knew who would win. Naturally, the first prince stepped forward. These demonstrations were routine for him, as he loved reminding everyone why he was the primary heir to the throne. In this world where Manus was absolutely everything, showing his power secured his path to the throne. He advanced confidently, unleashing a brutal energy that shook the room. But suddenly everything went wrong, and a look of absolute terror took over the crown prince's face. Seconds later, blood began pouring from his mouth, horribly staining the floor of the grand hall. Chaos broke out in the room as nobles and servants ran around in fear, understanding absolutely nothing. The other princes demanded explanations amidst the uproar, but only Ran understood the terrible truth behind this event. He remembered that, according to the original story, the first prince was not supposed to fall gravely ill for another 6 months. This should have happened way later, showing us that the timeline is already completely changing. Stick with me, because the prince collapsing and turning into a crow happened much faster than anyone expected, since the original 7th prince never had magic energy or the power to transform. Seeing this absolute chaos, Ran suspected his arrival had changed things far more than he ever imagined. The ritual left the palace in utter ruin, but nobody suffered quite as much as the first prince. That morning started out completely normal, But suddenly, his own body refused to obey him.
Just trying to channel his magic caused unbearable pain.
As the agony intensified, he collapsed to his knees, wondering why this was happening to him. His future felt completely ruined. He was the first prince, the chosen heir, destined to become the next ruler of the empire. Unlike commoners, he grew up firmly believing he was far superior to everyone else. Despair crushed his confidence as he grabbed a dagger, desperately trying to regain control of his emotions. Suddenly, a voice from the shadows calmly warned him to drop the hookah if he wanted to live. The prince instantly threw the pipe toward the sound, his eyes widening in shock as a familiar figure stepped forward. Standing right there was none other than Ran-Aran. The unexpected visitor looked incredibly relaxed, despite sneaking into the most heavily guarded room. Furious, the prince demanded to know how someone slipped inside completely unnoticed.
Now watch closely, because Ran smiled, saying if he were an assassin, this talk would already be over.
That chilling reply left the prince completely stunned.
When asked how he got in, Ran casually mentioned he simply scaled the outer walls of the castle.
Believe it or not, it didn't matter. Ran cared less about his entry and more about his brother's pathetic condition. Instead of answering, the prince just sneered.
He suddenly burst into a crazed laugh, showing he had already jumped to his own conclusions about the situation.
Thinking he was clever, he accused Ran of poisoning him to gain leverage for the future. Absolutely convinced he had figured it out, the prince lunged forward to attack his younger brother. Right before the blow landed, Ran coldly warned him that this agony was only the beginning of his nightmare. Within a single week, the pain would be so unbearable, he would beg for mercy. Those harsh words instantly froze him in his tracks.
Doubt flickered across the prince's face. Ran calmly explained he was not the poisoner, nor did he have any secret scheme.
In fact, he claimed he did not even know who was behind this bizarre and sudden illness.
One thing was certain, his condition would only get worse unless he made a drastic move right now.
With absolute gravity, Ran declared that this meeting was the heir's final chance to save his own life. He spoke with such certainty that it was impossible for the prince to ignore the warning. With his message delivered, Ran transformed into a crow and flew out into the stormy night.
Soaring through the rain, he thought about how lucky he was that his brother was too cowardly to follow.
Alone in his dark chambers, the first prince stood frozen as sheer despair slowly consumed his entire mind. That terrified prince was now a perfect pawn, plus traveling as a crow made covering long distances incredibly fast. Everything was going well, but now a sudden threat changes the game for us. Days later, back at the palace, Ran spent 2 whole days locked inside, carefully planning his next move. Outside, Achon was sick with worry. The prince barely made a sound, sparking the worst imaginable scenarios in his head. If anything happened to a royal under his direct care, the punishment would be absolutely devastating. Unable to handle the overwhelming anxiety any longer, he knocked on the door and called out softly. Just a few seconds later, the door swung open. Startled to see the prince, Anna lost her balance and tripped forward. The tray slipped, sending food flying everywhere. She hit the floor face first, absolute panic written all over her face. Ran stared at the mess with complete indifference, while Anna scrambled onto her knees, begging for forgiveness. Tears welled in her eyes, and she sobbed, stammering so hard she could barely form a proper sentence. This scene instantly reminded Ran of the absolute terror the servants felt toward his body's original owner. One mistake and they fear the worst. Stay with me to see what happens next. Let us dive in and see how Ran, after demanding payback for his dirty shoes and floor, decides to let it go. Instead, he ordered her to clean everything in 5 minutes and leave immediately. He also banned her from entering his room without permission. Honestly, he just wanted some peace and quiet. Time kept ticking by. A whole month passed since that disastrous ritual changed everything. Across the palace, whispers spread that the first prince lost his manners, stripping away the power that secured his royal throne. For the other princesses and princesses, this rumor was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The balance of power within the imperial family was shifting for the first time in years. To silence the gossip, the first prince convinced the emperor to move up the big annual royal hunt. Nobles and royals from all over gathered quickly. Riding through the forest, Ran was completely focused on a totally different problem. His main question was whether these shifts had already impacted the actual protagonist of Dark Hedda. Today was the day he would find out, so he quietly searched through the massive crowd. The novel's original hero had to be nearby, and finding him would show how much the timeline had shifted. Now watch closely here, because finding out if the plot was still intact or already ruined was vital. Before long, Saloseiron showed up right beside him with his usual look of pure disgust. The eighth prince immediately started mocking him, comparing him to a bug and saying that ugly black horse matched his soul. Instead of answering back, Ran ignored every single insult and just kept riding straight ahead. That total lack of reaction irritated Salos even more, though Ran did not care about the kid's petty anger. The group finally arrived at the Tower of Beginning, a giant structure sitting at the entrance of the Imperial Forest. Every year, this place hosted the hunt's grand opening ritual. While many saw this event as a simple contest, those who knew politics understood its real goal. The hunt was actually a stage for the royal family to show off their massive power to the nobles. Even the emperor knew this whole gathering was way more about gaining political influence than actual hunting. In the absolute center of attention stood Razia, the first prince. Ordered by the emperor, he stepped forward to start the show. One of his brothers jokingly asked if he had already decided what reward to demand after winning the hunt. Razia confidently declared that victory was already guaranteed, and his ultimate wish had been chosen a long time ago. His bold words perfectly showed the grand confidence expected from the man who was next in line for the throne. But don't get fooled here, because behind all those cheers, suspicious whispers about his secret illness were already spreading. Razia overheard some of these remarks and instantly remembered the warning Ran had given him a month ago. Deep doubt suddenly flooded his mind, despite his desperate attempts to block it out. Meanwhile, Ran watched the entire scene from afar with a slight smile. Unlike everyone else, he knew exactly what was next. Razia activated his manis, releasing an absolutely massive surge of pure energy. Dark clouds quickly blanketed the sky as howling winds whipped the area. Brilliant blue energy formed a giant vortex heading straight up. The immense pressure of the ritual forced every single spectator to step back. Several princes ordered the nobles to back away while they watched this incredible display in total awe. Standing right in the center of the storm, Razia shouted his name and claimed he was the empire's future ruler. His declaration echoed across the mountains as a massive shockwave burst from his body, wrapping the entire area in blinding blue light. Such an insane show of force left everyone completely stunned. Soon, rain began pouring from the skies, and not a single viewer could hide their absolute shock. Even battle-hardened military leaders were deeply impressed by this raw power. One general remarked, "This showed the real strength of the imperial bloodline." Shortly after, nobles and soldiers started chanting Razia's name in unison. The first prince exhaled in relief, basking in the crowd's admiration, but Ran knew the dark truth behind this celebrated miracle. A month earlier, inside the prince's private chambers, Ran had secretly handed Razia a special stone and commanded him to constantly channel his manis directly into it. According to Ran, this artifact would absorb the corrupted energy and temporarily halt the disease eating away at his body. The explanation sounded sketchy, but desperation forced him to obey. What do you and I think happens next? All right, let's watch together. The outcome was obvious, and Ran knew that stone only delayed the inevitable. That artifact was supposed to appear much later in the story and would never actually solve their problem permanently. A terrified servant rushed over to Ran to hand him a large bag, shaking with absolute fear while speaking. He was terrified of making a mistake before the infamous seventh prince, but after checking the contents, Ran dismissed him. Suddenly, a loud horn echoed through the entire clearing. The emperor raised his hand, looking at everyone with gravity. With that signal, the royal hunt officially began. Riders rushed into the imperial woods, while the nobles hesitated, questioning if it was even worth competing.
Most assumed an imperial family member would win regardless of their own efforts, but Rand did not care about winning at all.
He calmly guided his horse toward the dense forest, focusing on an entirely different goal instead. His real target was Agony Fedi, the former Knight Commander and a crucial player in future events. Not far away, Agony listened as a servant praised the terrifying power displayed during the recent ritual. The Duke calmly noted the Emperor's true goal was crushing the nobles' confidence and reminding them who truly rules. Terrified, his servant advised saving those comments for later, but Agony just laughed, completely brushing off the danger. Watch closely as Rand heads into the deep woods. The hunting grounds were divided into 3 distinct zones, based entirely on the size of the prey. While examining his map, he recalled a crucial detail from Dark Edda. During this very hunt, the protagonist would present a golden fox to the Emperor, capturing the entire Empire's attention. Knowing this, Rand spent weeks scouting the woods like a hawk, using novel clues about the creature's habitat. After piecing the clues together, Rand deduced that the creature had to live near a hidden forest lake. If his suspicions were correct, the protagonist would eventually show up there. Arriving early would let him confirm if the original storyline was still heading in his direction.
Confident in his plan, he pressed on, relieved Sichan delivered the requested bag just in time.
Once that bag reached the hands of Agony Fetus, his entire master plan would run perfectly smoothly. Unfortunately, he celebrated too early when his horse suddenly bolted, nearly throwing him straight out of the saddle. Caught completely off guard, Ron struggled to stay on, shouting at the stubborn beast to see what was wrong. After a chaotic sprint through the thick undergrowth, the stallion finally came to a dead stop. Thinking the animal was injured, Ryan quickly dismounted to inspect it closely. I know what you're thinking. Predator nearby? Not even close. Here is where we discover the hilarious, ridiculous truth. It turns out the horse flat out refused to carry that heavy bag. Annoyed, Rand scolded him for having zero work ethic. Far from feeling guilty, the animal stamped the ground with sheer fury, protesting his demands. And before he could respond, it turned and fled at full speed. A dead silence filled the entire woods. Alone with that heavy bag, Rand watched his only transportation vanish into the distance. Deep within the vast imperial forest, Agony Fetus continued his hunt alongside his loyal assistant, Tullin, though the old Duke had no interest in chasing ordinary prey. Mere wolves and deer were no match for a warrior who spent his entire life on bloody battlefields. As he rode, he reflected on the passage of time, admitting that old age was finally beginning to take its toll. Though countless people still viewed him as a living legend, Agony felt like just an old soldier whose glory days had faded, but Tolan immediately objected to that. To him, the Duke remained one of the greatest heroes in the entire history of the Empire. His victories protected the nation in countless battles, and almost no one could match his astonishing achievements. Even so, Agony smiled calmly and continued riding onward. After a long silence, the Duke asked Helen if he had ever seen the royal family up close, but his assistant admitted to only watching from afar. That response brought back old memories. Agony remembered explaining to his son that the imperial bloodline stood far above commoners, chosen directly by heaven. Think about it. His dynasty served for generations, and his son would inherit that massive, heavy responsibility. All right, let's check out how this powerful duke proudly remembered showing his son their family business, teaching him the weight of their status. But out of all those memories, one dark moment stood out as impossible to forget. While traveling through the Empire, his carriage suddenly ground to a halt with something jammed under the wheel. When a driver climbed down to check, Agony spotted a severely injured boy lying in the dirt. The whole scene made it clear that a horrible accident had just occurred. Reports at the time claimed the kid was actually a thief trying to rob a temple. Sadly, tragedies like that were common there, but even after hearing the explanation, Agony could never shake that mental image. The memory became even sharper when he recalled his own young son's reaction. Curious about all the noise, the little boy tried to step out of the carriage to investigate. Agony ordered him to stay inside, wanting to shield him from such horror. Years later, he still wondered if tragedy existed everywhere. No matter how noble or prosperous a grand empire claimed to be, Talon's voice finally pulled him back to the present moment. His aide reminded him they had to keep moving to save the family honor in the royal hunt. Nodding, Agony revealed he knew where a golden fox would appear. Now pay attention, because Ranaburan's adventure was way less noble. Still carrying the heavy bag left behind by his runaway horse, he ran through the forest, cursing under his breath. Every single step reminded him of his horse's betrayal. Transforming into a crow would solve everything, but that meant abandoning his highly valuable bag. Since the contents were crucial for his plans with Duke Agony Phoedius, that option was off the table. The thick forest only made things worse. Wild beasts could jump out, and Ran had zero weapons or real combat skills. Hearing a sudden rustle nearby, he froze on the spot. His mind pictured 1,000 dangers. Faced with the unknown threat, he considered dropping the bag and running for it. Grabbing a stone, Ran threw it toward the noise, hoping to distract whatever creature was lurking nearby.
The rock soared straight through the trees with surprisingly perfect aim.
Unfortunately, it didn't hit any animal. A loud thud rang out, and Ran gasped in absolute horror as he realized. The stone hit Talon directly in the face, knocking the poor assistant out cold instantly. Hiding behind the branches, Ran watched the scene in utter, absolute disbelief. You have to admit that is terrible luck. Out of the whole forest, he hit the one person he should never touch. Seeing Talon collapsed on the ground, the Duke's expression hardened. Agony Phoedius was no ordinary noble. In the original story, he was set to mentor our female lead and become one of the Empire's most respected figures. Ran had carefully crafted a plan to involve Dedut. He wanted to wait near the Golden Fox's territory and accuse Agony of stealing his prey, using that excuse to gain his trust later. But now his entire plan had completely fallen apart. Instead of a perfect first meeting, he had just brutally stoned the Duke's personal assistant. Examining the rock suspiciously, Agony suspected it was a deliberate ambush, likely by an assassin targeting him. After a few tense moments, Talon regained consciousness and managed to sit up. The Duke sighed with relief and immediately questioned his assistant to find out who had struck him. Hiding nearby, Ran felt his soul leave his body. If Talon remembered anything, he was absolutely done for. Disaster was imminent. The assistant squeezed his eyes shut, trying hard to recall exactly what happened. Watching him think sent Ran into a panic. Agony's family was so powerful that offending them meant life or death. It would practically be a death sentence for anyone. But then, something completely unexpected happened. Despite all the build-up, Talon remembered absolutely nothing and only had a tiny scratch on his forehead. Embarrassed by his own carelessness, the young aide apologized for failing to notice the attack sooner. That explanation let Ran breathe a massive sigh of relief, but Agony didn't look convinced at all. As a veteran commander with razor-sharp instincts, something about this whole setup still bothered him. Slowly, his eyes drifted toward Ran's hiding spot, and trust me, as their gazes almost locked, Ran threw all his dignity away. Let's dive into an absolutely wild chase today. Agony orders Talon to stay back and starts hunting down the mysterious attacker. And in this total mess, Ran could only blame himself. He sprinted through the woods with everything he had, knowing escaping a legendary hero with raw speed was practically impossible from the start. His lungs burned from exhaustion, and that heavy bag made every single step pure agony. Still, he kept running, desperately hoping he had put enough distance between himself and Duke Agony Phoedius. But that fragile hope shattered instantly when Agony appeared right on his heels. Moving at a terrifying speed despite his age, the Duke demanded the mysterious attacker show their face. And Ran realized that sooner or later he would be caught. He thought about ditching the bag and turning into a crow, but that would ruin his whole plan, so he tried something entirely different instead. Suddenly, a strange darkness began pooling around his feet. This mysterious energy wrapped around him, launching him forward with an explosive burst that caught Agony off guard as the gap between them widened. The Duke stared in disbelief. Frustrated, Agony slashed his sword through the empty air, hitting absolutely nothing. Now watch closely, because by the time he reached the clearing ahead, his prey had vanished. Meanwhile, Ran felt something extremely bizarre. His body became unbelievably light, making him wonder if he had somehow transformed into a crow mid-stride. Before he could figure it out, the thundering sound of hooves echoed in his ears. Glancing to the side, he realized he was running neck and neck with a runaway horse. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the forest, the royal hunt was proceeding completely as normal. Several princes were already showing off their kills to impress the emperor and nobles, especially one proudly posing next to a giant bear he'd just hunted. Another noble congratulated him, declaring his victory was already practically guaranteed. Smiling, the prince accepted the compliment and revealed he already knew exactly what reward to ask the emperor for. Far away from the celebrations, Ran collapsed under a tree, staring at the sky in pure frustration. He was exhausted, but the truly devastating part was losing his bag. I know what you're thinking, but this hurt worse than physical pain. Lying there, face covered, he lamented losing his entire plan. Everything had gone completely wrong ever since he accidentally attacked Talon. Ultimately, he forced himself up, because giving up solved nothing. If the bag dropped during the chase, he could still recover it. Meanwhile, Duke Agony Fetus and Talon had fierily reunited. The Duke asked his assistant if he was feeling better, and though still dizzy, Talon assured him it was just a minor blow. Their conversation shifted to the failed pursuit, and Agony admitted he had completely lost track of his target. He could not tell if that mysterious guy was incredibly fast or if old age was finally catching up to him. Just then, Talon noticed something strange on the ground. A bag was lying discarded in the tall grass. The Duke picked it up with curiosity. It looked expensive, but opening it up only made the mystery even more baffling. It was filled with rocks. Watching from his hiding spot, Ran lost all his composure upon seeing them hold his bag. Absolute panic consumed him, and he instantly threw himself right toward them. His sudden appearance startled both men, and Talon froze in recognition, stammering out the title of the seventh prince. Seeing a member of the imperial family, Agony and Talon immediately knelt, allowing Ran to take complete control of the situation. Looking annoyed, the prince demanded to know why they had his personal belongings in their possession. Agony calmly explained that he had simply stumbled upon the bag while searching the area. It sounded logical, but Ran deliberately chose to act with complete suspicion anyway. He remarked that everyone plays innocent when caught and directly asked if they were planning to steal from him. Agony swore on his family honor they would never do that, and the conversation turned to Talon's injury. Ran casually asked why the young assistant was bleeding, and Agony explained it was just an accident. But the assistant could not stop staring at the prince suspiciously, the culprit seeming more familiar the more he thought about it. Slowly, Talon took a step forward, his voice trembling as he seemed right on the verge of discovering the entire truth. Grabbing his hair, Ran harshly scolded him for speaking without permission and showing such utter disrespect to royalty, and hinted a sword would settle this. Trust me, we are in for wild drama. All right, you and I are about to watch panic completely paralyze Talon while the Duke steps forward to defend his assistant. This noble gesture did not surprise Ran. He knew Agony Fetus would never abandon his people. That unwavering loyalty was exactly what would make him the most legendary mentor in history. Ran decided it was finally time to reveal his true goal. He handed the bag to Agony, claiming that their meeting was pure fate. The prince then emphasized that the contents were vital, warning him never to let that bag out of his sight. Though those words sounded simple on the surface, the hidden meaning behind them was much deeper. Agony took the bag, carefully analyzing the prince. Their eyes met, and with his goal accomplished, Ran walked away. As he walked away with firm steps, relief finally replaced the tension in his shoulders. He knew perfectly well that he had acted terribly, but planting doubt in Agony's mind was crucial. Sometimes, to achieve your goals, you have to play the villain. As soon as the prince left, Talon immediately apologized. Agony brushed off the apology, reminding the young man he was lucky to survive with only a scratch. Right then, Talon remembered everything. Now pay attention here, because with a serious face, he reveals who threw the stone. Yes, it was Ranabiran himself. But before he could continue, Agony suddenly silenced him. The expressionless old Duke ordered his assistant to be quiet. Meanwhile, Ran Eberron walked away, recalling the future from Darkheader. In the original story, the Duke only betrayed the imperial family after suffering the devastating loss of his beloved son. That tragedy completely shattered his lifelong loyalty, pushing him directly down the path of bloody rebellion. If Ran wanted to speed up the course of events, he needed an extremely powerful trigger. The seeds were planted, and all that remained was to wait. Meanwhile, the grand royal hunt was ending. As the proud winner of the competition, Rosier finally revealed what his grand wish would be. Flashing a cold smile, he announced his plans to develop the entire region near the temple. At first glance, the proposal seemed wonderful, but the true purpose was quickly revealed. The plan was to kick the homeless out of the area, which to the nobles was completely understandable. I know you see it coming. The fate of Agony Fetus had now become completely inevitable. His strong sense of justice and compassion would inevitably clash with the terrible direction the Empire was taking. Combined with everything that happened before, the path toward a bloody future conflict was more than obvious. As the sun slowly dipped below the horizon, hidden among the bushes, Ran watched the area, making sure there were no witnesses, reviewing every detail to protect his plan. Even so, he felt an uncomfortable tightness in his chest. Pulling strings from the shadows made him feel much more like a villain than a hero. Shortly after, an elegant woman appeared in the forest, and Ran instantly recognized her face. It was Mental Aberrant, the first princess and one of the most influential figures in the Empire.
Her beauty was striking, but her unreadable gaze was what truly managed to intimidate anyone.
Ran formally greeted his older sister, but Mental disdainfully dismissed all royal etiquette. To her, there was no need for absurd formalities between siblings who shared the same royal blood. The conversation shifted drastically when Mental calmly asked him where his horse was. Ran quickly made up an excuse, but the first princess wasn't easily fooled. With an icy glare, she let him know she could see right through his lie. While he babbled nervously, Mental revealed her guards found a black horse wandering the forest. Since the animal belonged to him and failed its duty to serve royalty, she ordered them to dispose of it. This revelation crushed him inside, making him want to weep over the loss of his troublesome horse. But outwardly, he quickly dropped to one knee, begging forgiveness for neglecting the poor animal. Mental ordered him to stand, claiming she didn't want to look cruel by harshly punishing her dear little brother. And that's where we leave it. Relieved by his return, she promises him a new horse. What happens next? That bizarre encounter left Ran completely thrown off. Let's be honest, Princess Mantilla Baran is unreadable, threatening him one second, showing real empathy the next. Trying to understand her mind was like solving a puzzle with missing pieces. After the princess departs, we head to the camp's medical tent, where Tolan rests while a doctor treats his head wound. The doctor seemed both highly amused and utterly baffled by the incident. Getting hit by a normal rock is one thing, but getting struck in such a ridiculous way was outright absurd. When Duke Agony Fetus asked about recovery time, the physician said he would need at least a full week of rest. This news completely crushed Tolan, since missing the rest of the tournament felt like an absolute tragedy to him. But Duke Agony quickly reassured him, promising that he and Jack would handle everything during his recovery. Seeing his lord's genuine care brought a small, grateful smile to the young assistant's face. Even after all these years, Agony treated his people like family, joking that he had never given his assistant a proper rest. In the Duke's eyes, the kid's biggest dream was just eating delicious food and playing games all day long. That light-hearted tone briefly eased the heavy tension hanging in the room. Watch closely, because Agony even swore to win the grand prize to grant that simple wish. Night slowly fell over the camp. The Duke protected others so fiercely that he often ignored the danger looming right over him. A trait worthy of admiration, but dangerous enough to invite absolute ruin. Suddenly, his gaze fell upon the heavy sack of stones Ran had entrusted to him. Though he had no idea what they were for, he felt a mysterious duty. Picking up the sack, his feet unconsciously led him to a familiar place. Agony remembered bringing his young son Flynn to this very spot years ago. On that day, he told him about Sierra the Great, the legendary savior who arrived during humanity's darkest era. Legends say Sierra the Great possessed mysterious powers unseen in the modern era, over 1,000 years ago. He united countless warring territories under a single banner, founding what would later become the Great Abian Empire. And most importantly, he established the imperial bloodline that continues to rule the entire continent to this day. Remembering that moment brought the Duke deep warmth and nostalgia. His son remained the most precious person in his entire life. Every victory and sacrifice Agony had made throughout his life had only one goal: keeping his little boy safe. He always wished for the boy to inherit his noble ideals and serve the imperial crown with pride. But as he carried that heavy sack through the shadows, a sudden doubt crept into his mind. Ask yourselves this: why was he blindly obeying Rand's crazy request when these stones seemed completely useless? The prince's attitude was highly suspicious. On top of that, the royal hunt had ended much earlier than expected. At the grand gathering, nobles whispered in shock about the strange beastly roars echoing through the forest at midnight, all reaching the exact same conclusion. Prince Razia completely dominated the competition, wrapping up the 4-day event in just a single night. This legendary feat stunned everyone. Before the gathered nobility, Razia was officially crowned the grand champion of the hunt. The emperor himself offered personal praise, while the first prince accepted with a deep, respectful bow. As custom dictated, the victor held the absolute right to demand a special reward. Excitement rippled through the crowd as the nobles began speculating what the future ruler would ask for this year. Kneeling solemnly before the throne, Razia finally delivered his fateful request. He claimed the temple grounds were overrun with vagrants and refugees, arguing that strict action was needed to restore dignity to the Holy Land. Though his speech sounded reasonable on the surface, his cruel intentions became crystal clear to everyone immediately. His plan would grant him full power to completely banish those vulnerable people from the entire region. The moment he finished, Agony Fetus froze. Cold sweat poured down his face as ancient memories came rushing back. Visions of bloody battlefields, years of duty, and most of all, his son's face flashed before his eyes. Every warning sign from the past few months clicked into place. The horrific future he dreaded sat right before him. For a second, Agony stood frozen, but trust me, his mind was already completely made up. Gripping his sword, the Duke stepped forward. Gasping in horror, the crowd watched one of their greatest heroes march toward the throne, fully armed. His face showed absolute determination. Join me as we watch him silently apologize to his son, swearing to stop them from continuing down this path. Elsewhere, another part of Rand's plan was already moving. Rand appeared before him, calmly ordering him to move slowly. The prince ordered him to fetch medicine, snapping at him for resting when the ceremony had already begun. Utterly confused by what he was hearing, Talon asked which ceremony the prince was talking about. That answer sent him running immediately. Ignoring his throbbing headache, the assistant pushed his way through the massive crowd. Breaking through the crowd, what he saw froze him solid. Now pay close attention to Agony Fetus on his knees. Dozens of knights surrounded the Duke with drawn weapons. In the center, Razia looked down at him with pure contempt. The first prince demanded explanations for Agony Fetus's actions. In response, the Duke calmly declared his family had faithfully served the imperial line for over 1,000 years. Generation after generation sacrificed everything for the throne, yet somewhere along the way, that loyalty became twisted. Instead of protecting the empire with honor, families like his were being used more and more to oppress the defenseless. With those firm words, Agony Fetus formally presented his petition before the emperor himself. The ruler listened in absolute silence, keeping a cold, unreadable expression. Finally, the emperor acknowledged the Duke's lifelong devotion. He admitted that Agony Fetus had served the empire more faithfully than almost any other living soul. Yet that loyalty made everything highly ironic. The same devotion that earned him respect drove him to defy an imperial decree. His imperial power began gathering heavily around him. His gaze never wavered from the kneeling Duke. Under imperial law, defying the crown carried severe consequences. Agony Fetus understood this better than anyone. Closing his eyes, he accepted full responsibility, declaring he would pay with his own life. This completely shattered Tolan's composure. The assistant screamed his master's name, desperately trying to reach him. See that? Ran is watching everything from the crowd. Part of him wished the true protagonist could witness this. Far from the ceremony, a lone traveller knelt beside a river. Exhausted from his grueling journey, the young man scooped up some water, preparing to take a sip. Before he could drink, a strange blue energy suddenly began flowing across the river's surface. The phenomenon immediately caught his attention, and the young traveller stared intently at the bizarre sight. Slowly pulling down his hood, trust me, the one watching from afar was none other than the legendary Rattel. The actual protagonist of Dark Hedda,